Welcome to Lesson 1, Module 5, How to Recognize and Avoid Bias During Performance Appraisals. This lesson is again presented by the Hudson Corporation HR Department, also known as Team Consilium. During this lesson, we're going to go over different types of bias and judgment errors. We'll discuss how to recognize them, examples of them, definitions. We'll also discuss how then to make sure you are implementing your performance appraisal process without using bias and judgment errors and how to go about doing that. First of all, it's important to avoid bias and judgment during the performance appraisal process as it can cause hostility in the workplace. It can cause performance issues, lack of confidence in the leadership, and it also can dilute the importance of the performance appraisal process and goal. Bias and judgment can creep up intentionally or unintentionally. It's important to be able to recognize different types of bias and judgment errors so that while reviewing your appraisals, you can ensure that these are not present. First, we're going to go over different types of bias and judgment errors and give some examples. The first one we're going to talk about is the first impression or primacy effect. This is when raters form an overall impression about the ratee on the basis of some particular characteristics of the ratee identified by them. The identified qualities and features may not provide adequate base for appraisal. An example of this is, this employee is always dressed impeccably. They are a great employee. Obviously, the employee dressing nicely does not make them a great employee, especially in the different realms that they're graded on in a performance appraisal. Second one is called the halo effect. The individual's performance is completely appraised on the basis of a perceived positive quality, feature, or trait. In other words, this is the tendency to rate a man uniformly high or low in other traits if he is extraordinarily high or low in one particular trait. If a worker has few absences, his supervisor might give him a high rating in all other areas of work. An example of this could be, since Robert is a stellar performer in product output, I will rate him high in safety and teamwork areas as well. So obviously each category that's being rated, you have to look at those independently of each other. Because one person is great in the team environment, they might not be as great dealing with safety. So you have to make sure that you take each topic and rate them apart from each other. The horn effect is when the individual's performance is completely appraised on the basis of a negative quality or feature perceived. This results in an overall lower rating than may be warranted. A couple examples of this is, one, he is not formally dressed up in the office. He may be too casual at work, too. Or, since Robert is below average in product output, I will rate him as below average in safety and teamwork as well. Again, this goes hand in hand with the halo effect. Because an employee is not so great in one area does not mean that he's not great in other areas. Another bias is central tendency. This is when appraisers rate all employees as average performers. That is, it is an attitude to rate people as neither high nor low and follow the middle path. For example, a professor with a view to play it safe might give a class grade near the equal to B, regardless of the differences in individual performances. An example of this would be, I never rate anyone as excellent, then they would have nothing to strive for. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've heard this in my career. If someone deserves an excellent or above average, or so be it, then they deserve that. If they deserve a below average or not meeting goals, then that's what they deserve. Sticking in the middle lane is not going to help high performers get better, and it's not going to help lower performers get better. You have to be honest for each topic, and you have to explain to your employees how they are doing, honestly. The next bias is excessive stiffness or lenience. Depending upon the rater's own standards, values, and physical and mental makeup at the time of the appraisal, ratees may be rated very strictly or very leniently. Some of the managers are likely to take the line of least resistance and rate people high, whereas others, by nature, believe in the tyranny of exact assessment, considering more particularly the drawbacks of the individual and thus making the assessment excessively severe. The leniency error can render a system ineffective. If everyone is to be rated high, the system has not done anything to differentiate among the employees. Some examples of this is I do not feel like dealing with any backlash, so I will rate everyone as good performers. Or, I do not want anyone to get complacent, so I will rate all employees as below average. Obviously, again, these are just thoughts that come into a supervisor's mind that have no right being there because you need to rate everyone fairly. You need to take the time to look at everyone individually and make decisions from there. It's not about being a bad guy or not being harsh enough. It's about just being honest and helping the company become better and helping the workforce become a better, more efficient workforce. A personal bias is the way a supervisor feels about each of the individuals working under him, whether he likes or dislikes them. It has a tremendous effect on the rating of their performances. Personal bias can stem from various sources as a result of information obtained from colleagues, considerations of faith and thinking, social and family background. An example of this could be, I do not agree with Tim's spiritual background, so therefore I will rate him as a poor performer. Now this is tricky because this starts to get into a little bit of equal opportunity and hostile work environment. So personal biases, if you really let them interject into your career as a supervisor, is really going to put a big stop sign on your career. Personal biases have no place in the workplace. You have to be fair and honest to everyone. The next bias is called the spillover effect. This is when the present performance is evaluated much on the basis of past performance. An example of this is the person who was a good performer in distant past is assured to be okay at present also. And the last bias is called the recency effect, which is the exact opposite, is when the rating is influenced by the most recent behavior, ignoring the commonly demonstrated behaviors during the entire appraisal period. So with either of these, you're either basing someone on something good they did in the past, or something bad they did in the past, or something good they did recently that's fresh in your mind, or something bad they did recently. And we're going to discuss ways to avoid this, but you really have to take a good hard look at the employee's entire year of performances to kind of average out their performance. You cannot just go with one good effort or one bad effort. You really have to average. Okay, so now that we can recognize different biases and judgment errors, how do we go about eliminating them from our appraisals? Well, we came up with about 7 steps of things that we as a company can do to make sure that there's no room for bias or judgment errors in our performance appraisals. The first step is what we're doing now. We're completing a supervisor training on the fundamentals of performance management. We're going to go over the company's philosophy and practices. This is giving you guys the opportunity to learn exactly what a performance appraisal and a performance management system is, and how to go about being successful at that. Step 2 is to study the types of bias and errors most common in performance appraisals. And again, that's what we're doing now. As it says here, bias is not always negative. Supervisors can play favorites, and that can come into effect during the performance appraisal process. So again, it comes back to being fair and consistent across the board with each and every employee. Step 3 is reviewing employee documents to gain a complete picture of past performances. Contact the employee's supervisors and other departments when it's difficult to piece together work history and performance for long-term employees. Make note of discrepancies in earlier performance appraisals that may compound later performance issues. Step 4. Obtain the correct appraisal forms from your human resource department. and you can refer back to Lesson 1, Module 2 for the correct appraisal forms. Step 5. Read the performance standards for all the job duties and tasks for which the employee is responsible. Look at his or her performance throughout the entire evaluation period as objectively as possible. Gather documents that support performance, such as sales records, call logs, reports, and other materials that measure the employee's work quantitatively. This is super important. Being as objective as possible. Do not let any personal feelings, thoughts, run-ins with this employee, any of that cloud your judgment on their performance at the workplace. Step 6. Compare the performance standards to employees' actual work. For example, if performance standards for meeting company expectations require 12 closed sales per month, check his or her sales reports for every month during the entire evaluation period. That's something that can be looked at objectively. You have numbers. You know what the employee is supposed to do. Did they do that? Step 7. Draft the performance appraisal form and attach supporting documentation. If possible, ask a colleague to review your draft or ask a member of the human resource staff to read the performance appraisal draft. Review it the next day with a fresh set of eyes. Read the evaluation from your perspective and then put yourself in the employee's position, reading from his or her perspective. Again, very important final step. Keep the supporting documentation so when somebody asks you or when the employee says, "How did you come to this conclusion about me?" you have the documentation right there. You are always welcome to come to the HR department and talk to us about ideas you have, whether you think it's good or bad. We can look over it for bias. We can look over it just for another set of eyes. It's really important to, again, and if you're not noticing a pattern by now, you should be noticing a pattern by now. Stay fair and consistent throughout the entire process. Stay objective. Use supporting documentation. Use quantitative examples and proof, and everything should be okay. This was the lesson on how to avoid bias and judgment errors in the performance appraisal process. We will now get into some activities to test your knowledge in this module before taking the overall assessment.